My beloved child, there was a reason you found this message today, because what you are about to hear is not an ordinary love story but a moment that changed the fate of two hearts forever. Somewhere, a pair of wedding rings was already waiting to seal a promise that everyone believed could never be broken. No one in that room expected a single whispered name to silence every heartbeat at once. Before this story reaches its end, you will understand why some destinies refuse to disappear, no matter how many people try to bury them. Listen carefully. The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange kind of calm that felt almost too perfect to be real, as if the entire world had paused to witness a decision that had been delayed by years of unanswered questions, hidden emotions, and silent sacrifices. Every chair had been arranged with care, every flower seemed to bloom brighter than usual, every guest smiled as though they were certain this ceremony would become one of those beautiful memories spoken about for generations. Yet beneath the polished smiles and elegant decorations there existed an invisible tension that no one could explain, because even happiness sometimes carries the weight of unfinished stories. And although your soulmate stood surrounded by family members, friends, and people cheering for a future they believed had already been decided, their heart refused to feel completely present, almost as though a forgotten chapter was quietly calling from somewhere far beyond the walls of that celebration. The wedding rings rested inside a small velvet box held carefully in trembling hands, reflecting the morning light like two perfect circles meant to represent forever. Yet every time your soulmate looked down at them, a strange feeling crossed their face, not fear, not regret, but something much deeper that even they could not describe, because there are moments when the soul remembers what the mind has desperately tried to forget. They had spent countless nights convincing themselves that moving forward was the only choice left, believing the distance between the two of you had become too great, believing time had erased every possibility that destiny once promised, believing the silence between your lives meant the story had finally reached its end. Yet every promise they repeated to themselves sounded weaker than the quiet voice hidden inside their heart that continued asking the same impossible question. What if the story was never truly over? Around them, relatives laughed, photographers captured perfect smiles, musicians prepared gentle melodies, and conversations filled every corner of the hall, but your soulmate noticed something nobody else seemed able to see: tiny moments of hesitation appearing like shadows across familiar faces, as though even the people celebrating this marriage carried secrets they had chosen never to reveal. Their mother adorned just the collar of their outfit with loving hands, smiling warmly while hiding a sadness so carefully controlled that no ordinary person would have noticed it, but your soulmate knew that expression because they had seen it before during moments when difficult truths remained unspoken, and for just a second they wondered whether she, too, remembered someone whose absence had never truly disappeared. Don't skip. Because what happened next would remain hidden from almost everyone who stood inside that wedding hall for the rest of their lives. Hours passed as preparations continued, guests arriving from distant places, each bringing congratulations, gifts, and hopeful wishes for a future they assumed had already been written. Yet destiny rarely follows the plans created by human hands, and somewhere beyond the celebration another journey had already begun, one connected to your name in ways nobody could possibly imagine. A weathered envelope rested inside the pocket of an elderly man slowly making his way toward the venue, protecting it with unusual care as though it contained something more valuable than money, jewelry, or inheritance. He had promised someone many years earlier that this envelope would only be delivered when every other possibility had disappeared, when the wedding rings had already been chosen, when everyone believed there was no turning back, because only then would the truth reveal whether love had been forgotten or merely hidden beneath layers of fear. He remembered every word spoken on the day that promise had been made, every tear that fell, every silence that hurt more than anger ever could, and although decades had passed, the weight of that promise remained exactly the same. Meanwhile, your soulmate stepped away from the crowd for a brief moment, hoping fresh air might quiet the storm growing inside their heart, but instead they found themselves staring toward the distant entrance of the venue with an expression they could not explain, almost expecting someone they had not seen in years to suddenly appear, almost hearing memories instead of voices. Almost believing that destiny itself was standing just beyond sight waiting for the perfect moment to interrupt everything. They shook their head gently, embarrassed by thoughts they believed belonged only to the past, and forced themselves to return toward the ceremony where smiling faces welcomed them once again, yet no matter how brightly they smiled back, the emptiness inside refused to disappear. Somewhere among the arriving guests, two relatives exchanged nervous glances after noticing the elderly stranger approaching with determined steps, recognizing him immediately despite the passing years, because they knew exactly why he had come, and they also knew the truth he carried had the power to destroy carefully built lies that had survived for far too long. Without speaking a single word, they quietly moved toward him, hoping to stop whatever was about to happen before anyone else noticed. But the old man simply smiled with the calm confidence of someone who had already accepted every possible consequence. He whispered softly that no one could delay destiny forever, and those simple words left both relatives completely speechless because deep inside they knew he was right. As the ceremony officially began, every guest stood together while beautiful music echoed through the hall, creating the illusion that everything was unfolding exactly as planned, yet invisible threads of fate had already begun pulling every person toward a moment none of them would ever forget. The officiant welcomed everyone warmly before inviting your soulmate to step forward, and with steady hands they lifted the small velvet box containing the wedding rings, unaware that within only a few minutes those same hands would begin trembling for an entirely different reason. Their breathing slowed. Their heartbeat became louder than the music itself. Time seemed strangely heavier with every passing second. Somewhere behind the gathered crowd, the elderly man finally reached the entrance and quietly looked across the room until his eyes found your soulmate. He smiled sadly, almost like someone seeing hope after believing it had vanished forever. At that exact moment, another unseen figure moved silently through the guests, leaned close enough that only one person could hear, and in a voice barely louder than a breath, whispered your name. The wedding rings almost slipped from your soulmate's hands as every sound inside the hall vanished at once, and for a heartbeat that felt longer than an entire lifetime, Everything stopped. The silence that followed did not feel natural, because it was not the ordinary silence that comes when music fades or conversations pause. It was the kind of silence that arrives when fate itself steps into a room and demands that every living soul pay attention. And your soulmate remained completely frozen with the wedding ring still resting in their trembling hands while their eyes searched desperately through the crowd, unable to understand how a single whispered name could awaken memories they had buried beneath years of disappointment, unanswered questions, and painful acceptance. Their breathing became uneven as their heartbeat echoed louder than the voices surrounding them, and although the guests continued smiling for another brief moment, believing the pause was simply part of the ceremony, those standing closest immediately noticed something had changed because the expression on your soulmate's face no longer belonged to someone about to begin a new life. It belonged to someone who had suddenly remembered the life they were never supposed to lose. Their fingers tightened around the velvet box while flashes of forgotten moments rushed back without permission, quiet conversations beneath evening skies, promises made without witnesses, dreams spoken softly because they were too precious to say aloud, and the unmistakable feeling that no matter how impossible life became, one soul somewhere in this world still belonged beside theirs. They had fought those memories for years, convincing themselves they were nothing more than beautiful illusions, yet hearing your name spoken in that mysterious whisper shattered every wall they had built around their heart. And for the first time since entering the wedding hall they stopped pretending that everything was fine. Don't skip. Because what happened next was something no family member, no guest, and not even the bride or groom waiting nearby could have prepared for. The officiant gently repeated the next words of the ceremony, expecting your soulmate to step forward, but there was no response. Instead, they slowly turned toward the crowd, searching face after face with growing urgency as though someone impossible had suddenly appeared among hundreds of strangers. Their mother noticed the confusion immediately and quietly stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand upon their shoulder. Yet even she felt her own heartbeat quicken because she recognized the look in their eyes. It was the exact same expression they had worn years earlier on the day everything changed, the day a decision was made that no one had ever fully explained. She whispered softly, asking whether everything was all right. But your soulmate barely heard her because another question had already taken control of every thought inside their mind. Who had whispered your name, and how could that person possibly know a story the entire family believed had disappeared forever? Across the room, the elderly man remained near the entrance holding the weathered envelope close to his chest, patiently waiting for the moment he had protected for so many years. Several relatives noticed him again and immediately understood the danger of allowing him any closer. They moved quietly through the guests, pretending to greet old friends while carefully positioning themselves between him and the ceremony, hoping no one else would recognize the growing tension. But the old man showed no sign of fear. He had lived long enough to understand that truth always arrives at the exact moment it is needed, even when everyone wishes it would remain hidden. He remembered the promise he had made to someone whose final request had never left his heart, a promise that one day, when wedding rings appeared in your soulmate's hands, the truth inside that envelope must finally be revealed regardless of who tried to stop it. Meanwhile, whispers began spreading through the guests as people exchanged uncertain glances, wondering why the ceremony had suddenly paused. Some believed your soulmate had become overwhelmed with emotion, others assumed they were simply nervous, but a few older family members lowered their eyes without speaking because deep inside they feared something they had hidden for years was beginning to surface. Your soulmate looked once more toward the entrance, and for a brief second their eyes met the elderly stranger's gaze. Neither of them spoke, yet something passed silently between them, a recognition impossible to explain with words alone. The old man slowly nodded, almost as if confirming that everything your soulmate had secretly questioned for years had never been imagined at all. That single gesture sent another wave of emotions crashing through their heart. They took one hesitant step away from the ceremony, then another, ignoring the confused voices calling their name behind them. The officiant stopped speaking entirely. The musicians lowered their instruments. Cameras continued recording, capturing expressions no one would understand until much later. Their mother reached out again, gently asking where they were going, but before your soulmate could answer, one of the nervous relatives hurried forward and firmly insisted that the ceremony continue without delay, speaking far louder than necessary as though hoping confidence alone could silence destiny itself. The urgency in that relative's voice immediately caught your soulmate's attention because it felt less like concern and more like fear. They slowly turned toward them and, for the first time in many years, asked a question no one expected to hear. Why does everyone become afraid whenever that name is mentioned? The room fell silent again. No one answered. Faces that had been smiling only moments earlier suddenly looked away. Even those who knew nothing about the past sensed that something far greater than ordinary wedding nerves had entered the room. The elderly man realized the time had finally come. Holding the envelope carefully, he began walking forward with calm, measured steps. Two relatives rushed to intercept him, quietly demanding that he leave immediately. But he refused. His voice remained steady as he said, "You have delayed this day for long enough. You cannot hide the truth forever." Those nearby overheard the exchange, and the whispers spreading through the guests became impossible to ignore. Your soulmate watched every movement, every nervous expression, every desperate attempt to keep the old man away, and suddenly a realization struck with overwhelming force. The whisper of your name had not been an accident. It had been the beginning of something carefully protected for years. The wedding ring still rested in their hands, but they no longer felt like symbols of certainty. Instead, they felt unbearably heavy, as though they carried the weight of every unanswered question left behind by the past. The old man finally reached a distance where everyone could see the faded envelope he carried. Its edges were worn by time, its seal untouched despite the passing years. He raised it slightly and looked directly into your soulmate's eyes before speaking words that echoed through the stunned silence. These were never supposed to reach you. Unless someone tried to replace destiny with convenience. Every heartbeat inside the hall seemed to stop once again. Your soulmate stared at the envelope, unable to look away. Their mother suddenly covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes, recognizing it instantly before anyone else could speak, and in that heartbreaking moment everyone realized she had known about its existence all along. No one noticed that the person who had whispered your name had quietly disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind only one impossible question that now consumed every mind inside the wedding hall. What could possibly be written inside an envelope powerful enough to stop a wedding before the rings were ever exchanged? Chosen one. The moment your soulmate accepted the old envelope into their trembling hands, it felt as though time itself had stopped moving. The wedding hall remained silent, the musicians no longer played a single note, the guests stood completely frozen, and even those who had arrived expecting nothing more than a joyful celebration suddenly sensed that they were witnessing something far greater than a wedding. The velvet box containing the wedding rings rested in your soulmate's other hand, but its weight no longer came from the gold inside. It carried every unanswered question, every sleepless night, and every memory that had refused to disappear no matter how many years had passed. They slowly looked from the envelope to their mother's tear-filled eyes, desperately hoping she would shake her head and tell everyone this was some terrible mistake, yet she could not force herself to speak. Instead, she lowered her gaze, and that silence became louder than any confession she could have made. In that heartbreaking moment your soulmate realized that this was not a stranger interrupting their wedding. This was the past returning because someone had hidden the truth for far too long. Don't skip. Because what happened over the next few minutes changed the lives of everyone standing inside that room forever. The elderly man stepped forward with remarkable calm despite dozens of confused faces staring at him. He looked directly at your soulmate before quietly saying, "For years you believed someone abandoned you without explanation. Today you will discover that they never chose to leave. Someone else made that choice for both of you." Those words struck like lightning. A wave of whispers spread across the hall as guests exchanged uncertain glances, unable to understand who he was talking about. The relative who had tried several times to stop him immediately interrupted again, insisting that the ceremony continue, claiming the old man was trying to destroy a family's happiness, but the fear in that relative's voice made every sentence sound weaker than the one before it. Your soulmate slowly turned toward them and noticed their shaking hands, their restless eyes, and the beads of sweat beginning to appear despite the cool air inside the hall. It was the face of someone terrified that a secret was only seconds away from being exposed. Without raising their voice, your soulmate asked, "If none of this is true, then why are you so desperate to stop me from opening this envelope?" The question echoed through the room, but no answer came. Every person waiting for a response received only silence. Even the officiant quietly stepped back, realizing this wedding could no longer continue until the truth finally revealed itself. Your soulmate carefully traced their fingers across the faded seal. The envelope looked old enough to have survived many years untouched. Its edges were worn, the paper had softened with age, and yet it had been protected with extraordinary care, almost as though someone had spent years making sure it reached this exact moment untouched by time. Just before breaking the seal, another unexpected memory flooded back. They remembered standing beneath a cloudy evening sky long ago while someone smiled gently and whispered, "No matter what happens, never believe silence without searching for the reason behind it." At the time those words had sounded mysterious, almost unnecessary, because neither of them imagined life could ever separate them. But now those forgotten words returned with astonishing clarity, and your soulmate felt a painful realization growing stronger inside their heart. Perhaps the story they believed had ended had never truly ended at all. They slowly opened the envelope while every guest watched without blinking. Inside rested several folded pages and one small photograph hidden between them. Before unfolding the first page, your soulmate glanced at the photograph and instantly felt the color drain from their face. It was an old picture taken years before, showing a moment they had believed no one else had ever seen. On the back, written in familiar handwriting, were only 8 chilling words. "If you're seeing this, someone lied to you." The wedding ring slipped from your soulmate's trembling fingers, falling back into the velvet box with a sound so soft that it somehow echoed through the silent hall like thunder. At that exact moment, their mother covered her face and began crying uncontrollably, while one family member quietly whispered, "It can no longer be hidden." And another slowly stepped backward, realizing the first page of that forgotten letter was about to expose a betrayal that had been carefully protected for years. Your soulmate remained perfectly still, unable to pull their eyes away from the faded photograph resting in their hands. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the whispers spreading through the wedding hall, and every person present instinctively understood that the ceremony had become something entirely different from what they had expected only minutes earlier. The wedding ring still rested inside the open velvet box, untouched now, almost forgotten as every ounce of attention shifted toward the weathered envelope and the pages hidden inside it. Your soulmate slowly turned the photograph over once more, reading those 8 haunting words again and again as if hoping they would somehow change, but they never did. "If you're seeing this, someone lied to you." The sentence refused to leave their mind. It echoed through every memory they had spent years trying to bury, every unanswered goodbye, every message that had never received a reply, every promise that had appeared to vanish without explanation. They had blamed fate. They had blamed distance. They had even blamed themselves. But for the very first time, another possibility emerged. What if none of those things had ended your story at all? What if someone had carefully rewritten it before either of you ever had the chance to choose? Don't skip. Because the next discovery would force people who had remained silent for years to question everything they believed they had protected. With slow, trembling hands, your soulmate unfolded the first page inside the envelope. The paper had yellowed with age, yet the handwriting remained remarkably clear. Before reading a single line aloud, they immediately recognized it. Their breathing stopped. It was unmistakable. They had seen those careful strokes years before on birthday notes, small handwritten messages, and quiet promises never meant for anyone else's eyes. The sight alone was enough to send tears gathering in their eyes before they had even reached the first sentence. The guests watched in complete silence while your soulmate began reading quietly to themselves. With every line their expression changed. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief became sorrow. Sorrow slowly transformed into something far more powerful. Determination. Their hands trembled so intensely that the elderly man gently stepped closer, ready to catch the pages if they slipped. Across the room, several relatives refused to meet your soulmate's eyes. One quietly sat down without saying a word. Another looked toward the exit as though considering leaving before the truth reached everyone. Their mother remained frozen, tears flowing silently, because she already knew exactly what those pages contained. She had carried the burden of that knowledge for years, believing silence would spare everyone greater pain, never imagining that silence itself would eventually become the greatest wound of all. Your soulmate finally lifted their eyes from the letter and slowly looked across the room. The celebration that had filled the hall only minutes earlier had completely disappeared. The flowers, the decorations, the music, even the beautifully prepared wedding aisle now seemed strangely distant, as though none of it belonged to this moment anymore. In a voice barely above a whisper they asked, "Why did no one tell me?" No one answered. The question lingered in the air until it became impossible to ignore. They looked toward their mother again, searching for the explanation only she could give. After several painful seconds, she finally took one hesitant step forward. Her voice shook as she admitted that years earlier she had believed she was protecting her child from heartbreak, that trusted family members had convinced her certain things were better left unknown, that they had promised time would heal every wound. She confessed that she had wanted to speak many times, but fear had always silenced her before the words could escape. The admission sent another wave of shock through the guests. Some lowered their heads. Others stared in disbelief. Yet before she could say anything more, the elderly man quietly interrupted. "That is only part of the truth," he said gently. "There is another letter still hidden inside that envelope. The one no one was ever supposed to destroy." Every face turned back toward the worn papers as your soulmate slowly reached deeper into the envelope, unaware that the final folded page contained a single handwritten name. The name of the very family member who had secretly changed the course of two lives, and the moment that page was opened, there would be no way for anyone in that wedding hall to hide the truth any longer. Don't skip. Because the moment the silver key rested in your soulmate's hand, it no longer felt like an ordinary key. It felt like the weight of every unanswered question they had carried for years. The wedding hall remained completely silent. No music played. No one spoke. The wedding ring still lay inside the velvet box, untouched, while every eye followed your soulmate. The elderly man quietly looked around the room before saying, "Some doors are locked with metal. Others are locked with fear. Today, both are about to open." Those words sent another wave of tension through the guests. Several relatives immediately exchanged nervous glances. One person slowly stepped backward. Another lowered their head. Their mother closed her eyes for a moment, knowing that once the truth came out, nothing inside this family would ever be the same again. Your soulmate looked at everyone gathered around them and quietly asked, "If all of you truly believed I had moved on, then why does everyone look so frightened now?" No one answered. The silence itself became the confession. The elderly man then asked everyone to follow him. Without another word, he walked through a narrow hallway connected to the old section of the building, a place most guests had never even noticed before. Your soulmate followed closely behind while dozens of confused family members slowly came after them. Dust covered the wooden floor, old family photographs hung along the walls, and the air carried the feeling that this place had been forgotten for many years. Finally, the old man stopped beside an old wooden cabinet. He gently moved it aside, revealing a loose floorboard beneath it. Kneeling down carefully, he lifted the board and reached inside. A few seconds later, he pulled out a small wooden box covered in dust. It was locked. The silver key in your soulmate's hand matched the lock perfectly. Several people gasped. One elderly aunt covered her mouth in disbelief. Another family member quietly whispered, "I thought it was destroyed." The old man slowly shook his head. "Some people tried," he replied. "But truth has a strange habit of surviving." Your soulmate stared at the box for several long moments before finally inserting the key into the lock. Their hands trembled so much that they needed 2 attempts before the key turned. The ancient lock clicked open with a sound that echoed through the silent room. As the lid slowly lifted, everyone leaned forward. Inside were dozens of unopened letters tied together with an old ribbon, a small leather journal, several printed photographs, and an old mobile phone carefully wrapped inside a white cloth. None of it looked damaged. Everything had been preserved exactly as it had been left years ago. Sitting on top of everything else was one sealed envelope with large handwritten words across the front, "If this box is ever opened, it means the truth has finally won." Your soulmate carefully picked up the envelope while trying to steady their breathing. Before they could break the seal, a loud voice suddenly shouted from the doorway, "Don't read it." Every person turned toward the sound. The same relative who had tried to stop the wedding stood there, their face completely pale. Sweat covered their forehead. Their hands were shaking uncontrollably. For the first time that day, they were no longer pretending to remain calm. Your soulmate slowly looked directly into that relative's eyes and asked one simple question. "What are you so afraid of?" The room fell completely silent once again. The relative opened their mouth to speak, but no words came out. Their mother suddenly looked at that family member with growing disbelief, as though a terrible suspicion had just entered her mind. The elderly man quietly stepped forward and said, "The letters inside this box are not opinions. They are proof. Every missing message, every hidden conversation, every decision made behind your backs. Everything is here." Your soulmate lowered their eyes toward the unopened envelope once more. They could feel their heartbeat pounding inside their chest. Deep down they already knew that once this final envelope was opened, someone standing only a few feet away would no longer be able to deny what they had done, and before another wedding ring could ever be placed on anyone's hand, an entire family would finally learn who had spent years making sure your name disappeared from your soulmate's life. Don't skip. Because the room no longer felt like part of a wedding. It had become a courtroom where the past was quietly waiting to testify. Your soulmate stood in the center of the forgotten room with the final sealed envelope resting in their hands. Every breath felt heavy. Every heartbeat seemed to echo through the silence. The elderly man nodded gently, silently giving permission for the truth to finally speak. With slow, careful movements, your soulmate broke the seal and unfolded the last letter. Before reading more than a few lines, their expression changed completely. Shock filled their eyes. Then disbelief. Then an overwhelming sadness that no words could hide. They slowly lowered the paper for a moment, trying to steady their breathing. Everyone watched without moving. No one dared interrupt. Even the family member standing near the doorway seemed unable to look directly at the letter anymore. It was as though they already knew exactly what was written inside. Your soulmate finally lifted the page again and continued reading. The letter explained that years earlier, every message sent between the two of you had been secretly intercepted before it could ever reach its destination. Phone calls had been blocked. Letters had been hidden. Meetings had been cancelled using carefully planned lies. Each time either of you believed the other had chosen silence, someone else had quietly created that silence. Neither heart had truly walked away. Both had simply been trapped inside a story written by someone else's deception. A painful silence settled over everyone. Their mother covered her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. She whispered that there had always been moments that never made sense to her, moments when she questioned why everything had fallen apart so suddenly, but she allowed herself to believe the explanations she had been given because they came from someone she trusted completely. Your soulmate slowly closed their eyes. Memories they had blamed on fate now appeared in an entirely different light. Every unanswered message, every missed opportunity, every goodbye that never sounded real. They had carried guilt for years over something that had never been their fault. They looked around the room one more time before quietly asking, "Who benefited from keeping us apart?" The question hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. No one answered immediately. Then the elderly man pointed toward the old mobile phone inside the wooden box. "The final answer is inside that phone," he said. "It contains one recording that was never meant to survive." Your soulmate carefully picked up the old phone. Its battery had long since failed, but the elderly man reached into his pocket and removed a small portable charger he had carried all along. "I promised the person who trusted me," he said softly, "that if this day ever arrived, nothing would prevent the truth from being heard." After several tense moments, the screen slowly came to life. There was only one saved audio file. No title. No date. Just a single recording waiting to be played. Every person in the room unconsciously held their breath. Your soulmate pressed play. At first there was only static. Then voices began to emerge. One voice belonged to someone you would immediately recognize if you were there. The second voice belonged to a close family member. They were speaking in low tones, discussing how separating the two of you would make life simpler for everyone else. They talked about hiding letters, deleting messages, inventing misunderstandings, and making sure neither of you ever discovered the truth. Then came the sentence that shattered the remaining silence in the room: "If they ever learn what we did, they'll never forgive us." The recording ended. No one moved. No one spoke. The family member whose voice had just filled the room slowly closed their eyes, realizing there was nothing left to deny. Before anyone else could react, they took one hesitant step forward, looked directly at your soulmate, and whispered with tears in their eyes, "It's time you knew why I made the worst decision of my life." Don't skip. Because after those heartbreaking words, no one inside the room cared about the wedding decorations, the guests, or even the ceremony that had been waiting outside. Every eye remained fixed on the family member who had finally stepped forward. Their hands shook uncontrollably as tears filled their eyes. For years they had carried a secret they believed would remain buried forever, but the letters, the photographs, and the recording had taken away every place left to hide. They slowly looked at your soulmate before speaking in a voice filled with regret. "I told myself I was protecting this family. I convinced myself that separating you would prevent future pain. I believed that time would erase what I had done. Instead, every year made the guilt heavier." The room remained silent as they admitted that they had intercepted messages, hidden letters, and encouraged misunderstandings until both of you eventually believed the other had chosen to walk away. They confessed that every lie had been told out of fear, not hatred, but fear had created consequences far greater than they had ever imagined. Their apology echoed through the room, yet everyone understood that some losses could never be completely repaired by words alone. Your soulmate stood quietly for several moments without speaking. They looked down at the wedding ring still resting inside the velvet box and realized those rings represented a future built upon a misunderstanding that had never belonged to them. Slowly, they closed the velvet box and placed it gently on the nearby table. The officiant, who had followed the family into the room, lowered his head with complete understanding. No one objected. No one argued. Every guest recognized that the truth had changed everything. Your soulmate then turned toward their mother. She walked forward with tears streaming down her face and embraced them tightly, whispering over and over that she was sorry for allowing silence to become stronger than trust. Your soulmate held her for a long moment before quietly saying, "We cannot change yesterday. But we can stop yesterday from stealing tomorrow." The elderly man smiled gently, knowing the promise he had carried for so many years had finally been fulfilled. He handed your soulmate one final folded note that had remained hidden beneath the letters. Unlike the others, it contained only a single sentence written in familiar handwriting: "If destiny is real, the truth will always arrive before it's too late." Your soulmate read those words twice before carefully folding the note and placing it inside their pocket. For the first time that day, the sadness in their eyes was replaced by peace. They no longer carried the burden of wondering why everything had fallen apart. They finally knew the truth. The unanswered questions that had haunted them for years no longer controlled their heart. The ceremony scheduled for that day never continued. Instead of exchanging wedding rings under false assumptions, your soulmate chose honesty over convenience and truth over appearance. Guests quietly left the hall with a lesson they would never forget: that love can survive distance, silence, and even years of misunderstanding, but lies eventually collapse beneath the weight of the truth. The family member who confessed accepted responsibility for their actions, understanding that forgiveness could never be demanded, only hoped for through sincere change. Their mother promised that from that day forward no secret would ever again be allowed to decide someone else's future. As the evening sun settled beyond the windows of the old hall, your soulmate stepped outside carrying nothing except the small bundle of letters, the faded photograph, and the final note that had waited so many years to be read. They looked toward the horizon with quiet hope, no longer searching for answers but preparing for a future built on truth instead of deception. Somewhere beyond that moment, destiny still had its own path to reveal, but this time it would not be controlled by hidden voices, intercepted messages, or family secrets. Whatever tomorrow held would finally belong to the two hearts that had never truly stopped remembering one another. And that is how a single whispered name stopped a wedding, uncovered years of hidden deception, healed wounds that silence had only deepened, and reminded everyone present that true love is not measured by how easily it begins, but by how faithfully it survives every attempt to erase it. Some stories end with wedding rings being exchanged. This one ended with something even more valuable: the truth finally setting every heart free.